Be me, Franco. Just a regular guy working a regular 9 to 5 office job. It's not glamorous. I'm not a Wall Street shark or a tech bro millionaire. My job is to sit in a cubicle and stare at spreadsheets until my eyes glaze over. The company I work for is a mid-level cog in a much larger, faceless machine. We do something with logistics and supply chain management. Honestly, I couldn't explain the specifics to you if my life depended on it. All I know is that numbers go in, different numbers come out, and I get a paycheck every 2 weeks that covers my rent and my internet bill. It's the kind of place where the biggest event of the year is the annual chili cook-off. Our office is a monument to the color beige. Beige walls, beige cubicle dividers, beige carpet that has seen better decades. The fluorescent lights hum a constant monotonous tune that you stop hearing after your first week, but it burrows into your subconscious forever. The highlight of my day is usually the 10-minute walk to the good coffee shop, not the sad brown water that gurgles out of the office machine. The team I'm on is pretty standard, a collection of people just trying to get through the day. There's Kai. He's this quiet, whip-smart guy who sits 2 cubes down from me. He doesn't say much, but when he does, it's usually something that cuts right to the heart of a problem. He's the type to notice a tiny flaw in a system that everyone else has missed for years. Spends his lunch breaks doing Sudoku puzzles that look like they were designed by a madman. Then there's Youssef. Youssef is a big dude. Not fat, just genuinely large. He's tall, broad-shouldered, and built like he could have been a linebacker if he hadn't chosen a life of data entry. He's the gentlest giant you'll ever meet. Always smiling, always willing to help you move a heavy box of printer paper. The office is clearly not designed for a guy his size. His knees are permanently jammed against the underside of his desk. The standard issue office chair groans in protest every time he sits down, looking more like a stool than a proper seat. For him, sitting comfortably is a geometric impossibility. His legs just have to go somewhere. The rest of us are just a mix of personalities. We get along. There's a sort of unspoken truce in our little corner of the building. No loud phone calls, no microwaving fish in the break room, and no talking about politics or religion. It worked. We had a peaceful, if boring, existence. This delicate ecosystem was functioning perfectly fine for years. Then she arrived. The email landed in our inboxes on a Monday morning. Subject: welcoming our new HR manager. It was accompanied by a slightly blurry, overly enthusiastic headshot of a woman named Serena. The email was full of the usual corporate fluff. Thrilled to join the team. Looking forward to fostering a dynamic and inclusive culture. My door is always open. We'd all seen it before. HR managers came and went. Usually they'd make us all do some pointless online training module about workplace safety and then fade into the background. We figured this would be no different. We were wrong. Serena was different. She was young, maybe late 20s, and had the kind of relentless energy that's exhausting to be around. She walked through the office like she was on a mission to discover problems. Armed with a clipboard and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, she would just observe. It was unsettling. You'd be deep in a spreadsheet and suddenly feel a presence behind you. You'd turn around, and there she'd be, jotting down a note before giving you that bright, empty smile and moving on. Her first week, she sent out 3 company-wide surveys. How can we improve your workplace experience? What does an ideal office culture look like to you? Anonymous feedback on interdepartmental synergy. Most of us just clicked random bubbles to get the pop-up to go away. A week later, the first changes started. The decent coffee in the break room was replaced with a new brand. It was organic, fair trade, single origin, and tasted like burnt dirt. An email from Serena explained this was part of a new wellness initiative. The old plastic plants were replaced with real ones that required watering. Another email explained this was to improve air quality and employee morale. Within 2 weeks, all the plants were brown and wilting because no one remembered to water them. These were minor annoyances, but they were a sign of things to come. Serena wasn't content with just changing the coffee. She needed a cause, a project. She needed to find a dragon to slay so she could prove her worth. And in our quiet, beige, dragon-free office, she decided she would have to invent one. The rumblings started subtly. An email went out with the subject, Mindful Mondays Creating Shared Spaces. It was a newsletter-style email with links to articles. The psychology of personal space in the workplace. Are you a space invader? How to practice situational awareness. It was all very vague and passive-aggressive. I remember Kai reading it, letting out a quiet sigh, and just shaking his head. He saw it coming before any of us. A few of us talked about it by the now terrible coffee machine. The consensus was that it was just more corporate nonsense that would eventually blow over. We drastically underestimated her ambition. The following week, it happened. We all received a calendar invite for a mandatory, department-wide meeting. Title: Policy Update and Inclusivity Seminar. Location: Conference Room B. Attendance was required, no exceptions. A collective groan rippled through the cubicle farm. A mandatory meeting with HR is never good news. It either means layoffs or some new, inconvenient policy. We all filed into the conference room at the appointed time. The air in that room is always stale, a mix of old coffee and quiet desperation. Serena was standing at the front, next to a projector screen, radiating an almost disturbing level of excitement. She was about to have her moment. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice ringing with false cheerfulness. "I've been doing a lot of observing and listening since I joined the team." "Oh, we know," we thought in unison. "And I've identified an area where we can make a significant positive impact on our workplace environment, ensuring it feels safe and welcoming for everyone." She clicked a button and the projector flickered to life. The first slide was just the company logo and the title of her presentation, Project SPACE, Safe, Productive, and Considerate Environment. She had come up with an acronym. It was serious. She spent the next 10 minutes talking in circles, using every corporate buzzword in the book. She spoke of unconscious bias, nonverbal communication, and microaggressions. It was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing while using a lot of words. I could feel my brain starting to shut down. I glanced around the room. Most of the guys looked bored or confused. Youssef, in his too small chair, just looked uncomfortable. Some of the women looked like they were trying to solve a complex math problem in their heads. Others looked like they were trying not to laugh. Then, Serena clicked to the next slide. It was a diagram. A cartoonish, gender-neutral figure was shown sitting in a chair in two different ways. One was labeled closed posture. The figure was sitting with its knees and ankles tightly together. The other was labeled dominance posture. The figure was sitting with its knees spread apart. A giant red X was plastered over the dominance posture image. A knot of dread started to form in my stomach. "One of the most common forms of nonverbal territorialism in a professional setting," Serena announced, her voice filled with the gravity of a surgeon announcing a diagnosis, "is something called manspreading." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The word just hung there in the stale air. It felt ridiculous. "This is the practice of sitting with legs wide apart, thereby encroaching on the personal space of others," she explained. "While often unconscious, it can make colleagues feel intimidated, uncomfortable, and disrespected. It's a subtle assertion of dominance that has no place in a modern, collaborative workspace." She clicked again. A new slide appeared. This one was all text, bullet points outlining the new zero-tolerance seated posture policy. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain refused to process them. All employees are required to maintain a seated posture with their knees no further than shoulder width apart. In shared spaces, such as meeting rooms and the break room, a closed knee posture is to be considered the standard of professional conduct. Failure to adhere to this policy will result in a verbal warning, followed by a written warning, and may be subject to further disciplinary action. This was real. This was actually happening. She was creating a formal, written policy about how we were allowed to sit in a chair. I looked over at Youssef. His face was a mixture of disbelief and genuine panic. For him, sitting with his knees together wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a physical challenge. He was already doing his best to fold his large frame into the tiny chair. This new rule was asking the impossible. Serena continued, oblivious to the wave of stunned silence that had washed over the room. She talked about how this new policy would lead to a more harmonious and respectful environment, how it would empower people to feel more comfortable in their shared spaces. She was genuinely proud of herself. She believed she was doing something important. She finally finished her speech. "Are there any questions?" she asked, with that same bright, unwavering smile. No one said a word. What could we even say? How do you begin to argue against something so completely and utterly absurd without sounding like a child? Any objection would just be twisted. If we complained, we'd be accused of being defensive, of not caring about our colleagues' comfort, of embodying the very toxic masculinity she was trying to fight. She had created a perfect trap. The silence stretched on for an awkwardly long time. "Great," Serena finally chirped, clapping her hands together. "I'm so glad we're all on the same page. I'll be sending out a formal memo later today, and new posters will be going up around the office to remind everyone of our commitment to Project SPACE." The meeting was dismissed. We all filed out of the conference room like we were in a trance. A low murmur started as soon as the door closed behind us. Disbelief, anger, ridicule. It felt like a prank, but the earnestness on Serena's face told us it was all too real. We gathered in small pockets back in the cubicle farm, speaking in hushed tones. "Is she serious?" They can't actually enforce that, can they? What are we supposed to do? Get out a ruler every time we sit down? Yusuf just went back to his desk, looking defeated. He sat down and consciously tried to squeeze his knees together. The look of physical strain on his face was painful to watch. I walked over to Kai's cubicle. He was just sitting there, slowly spinning a pen between his fingers, a thoughtful expression on his face. He wasn't angry like the rest of us. He looked analytical. "This is insane," I said, keeping my voice down. He didn't look up. He just kept spinning the pen. "It's not about insanity, Franco," he said quietly. "It's about metrics." "What are you talking about?" He finally stopped the pen and looked at me. "She's new. She needs to prove her value. She needs to show her bosses that she is an agent of change. So she invents a problem, creates a policy to solve it, and then she'll collect data to show how effective she's been." He was right. It wasn't about comfort or respect. It was about her career. It was a corporate game, and we were the pawns. "So what do?" I asked. "Complain to her boss? That feels like a losing battle." "It is," Kai confirmed. "Complaining is what she expects. It would validate her position. It would frame us as the problem." He leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. It was the kind of smile that meant he had an idea. "An unjust rule, when followed to the letter, becomes its own punishment," he said, sounding like some kind of ancient philosopher. "You can't fight the bureaucracy. You have to become the bureaucracy." A few of the other guys had drifted over to his cubicle, drawn in by our conversation. "What does that mean?" someone asked. Kai looked around at the small group of us. "It means we don't fight the rule," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "We don't break it. We don't complain about it." He leaned forward, and his smile widened. "We embrace it. We enforce it upon ourselves more strictly than she ever could. We will become the most considerate, posture-perfect employees this company has ever seen. We will comply with such malicious precision that we grind this entire department to a halt." A spark of understanding lit up in everyone's eyes. It was a brilliant plan, a protest disguised as obedience. It was a way to fight back without giving her any ammunition to use against us. We weren't going to be angry employees resisting change. We were going to be model employees crippled by our own compliance. The plan was set. The war for our sitting rights had begun, and our weapon of choice was not rebellion, but absurd, over-the-top obedience. The next morning, the atmosphere in the office was different. The memo from Serena was waiting in our inboxes, officially cementing the new policy into company law. As promised, posters had been put up overnight. They were strategically placed in the break room, by the coffee machine, and in the bathrooms. They featured the same cartoon figure from the presentation, demonstrating the correct and incorrect way to sit, under the cheerful banner of Project SPACE. It felt like we were in a dystopian satire. I walked to my desk and saw that Kai was already there, implementing the first stage of his plan. He was sitting perfectly upright, his back ramrod straight. His knees and ankles were pressed so tightly together, it looked unnatural. He had a look of intense, focused concentration on his face, as if sitting properly was the most complex task he'd ever performed. As other guys from our team started to trickle in, they saw Kai and immediately understood. One by one, they went to their desks and assumed the position. A silent wave of malicious compliance spread across our section of the office. I sat down and did the same. It was immediately uncomfortable. I'm just an average-sized guy, and even for me, it felt constricting. My hips felt tight. My lower back started to ache almost instantly. Trying to type on my keyboard while maintaining this posture felt awkward and clumsy. Then Yusuf arrived. He walked in, saw all of us sitting like statues, and a slow grin spread across his face. He understood. He wasn't alone in this. He went to his desk and began the Herculean task of folding himself into the mandated position. It was a struggle. He had to physically grab his legs and force them together. The resulting posture was grotesque. He was perched on the edge of his chair, his broad shoulders hunched over, his whole body tense with the effort of keeping his knees from springing apart. He looked like a bear trying to ride a tricycle. Serena arrived a few minutes later, coffee in hand. She swept her gaze across the office, and a look of smug satisfaction appeared on her face. She saw us. She saw us all sitting in perfect compliance with her new rule. In her mind, she had won. She had single-handedly transformed the culture of our department overnight. She had no idea that the game had just begun. The first hour was quiet. The only sound was the clicking of keyboards and the ever-present hum of the lights. But it was a tense quiet. Then, the first crack appeared. One of the guys, a fellow spreadsheet gazer named Mark, let out a loud theatrical groan. He pushed his chair back from his desk and slowly, painfully, stood up. "Oof, my back," he announced to no one in particular. "I've got a cramp, need to stretch." He proceeded to spend the next 2 minutes doing a series of deep lunges and leg stretches right in the middle of the aisle. He made sure to take up as much space as possible. Serena looked up from her office, a flicker of annoyance on her face, but she couldn't say anything. He was just stretching. 10 minutes later, someone else stood up. "My hip is locking up," he declared, before starting his own stretching routine. This was part 2 of Key's plan, weaponized discomfort. Soon it became a regular occurrence. Every 15 minutes or so, a different guy would stand up with a groan or a sigh, complaining of a new ache or pain, and perform an elaborate stretching ritual. The workflow of the department was constantly being interrupted by these displays of ergonomic distress. I took my first stretch break around 10 a.m. "Man, my sciatic nerve is really acting up today," I said to the cubicle wall. Standing up and stretching actually felt genuinely good. The relief from the constricted posture was immense. I did a few hamstring stretches, making sure I was in Serena's line of sight. She was watching us, her smile now gone, replaced by a thin, tight line. She knew we were doing this on purpose, but her own policy gave her no recourse. We weren't being disruptive in a way she could punish. We were simply dealing with the physical consequences of her rule. The masterpiece of the morning, however, belonged to Yusuf. Around 11 a.m., he made a noise that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. "I can't feel my left leg," he said, his voice laced with genuine-sounding concern. He stood up, but his leg buckled beneath him. He stumbled dramatically, catching himself on his cubicle wall. "It's completely asleep," he exclaimed, loud enough for the whole office to hear. He then spent the next 5 minutes stomping his foot on the ground and shaking his leg violently, trying to get the blood flowing again. It was a brilliant piece of theater. Several of our female colleagues, who had been watching this whole saga with a sort of detached amusement, were now openly struggling not to laugh. They knew exactly what was happening. They weren't part of it, but they weren't siding with Serena either. They were just spectators enjoying the show. The productivity of our department for that morning was probably close to zero. It was a constant cycle of sitting uncomfortably, groaning, and then getting up to stretch. The synchronized performance was beautiful in its absurdity. The day was just getting started. Kai had more planned for the afternoon. We were about to escalate things. The lunch break felt like a council of war. We all sat in the break room, consciously spreading our legs as wide as we possibly could, savoring the temporary freedom. Yusuf looked like a new man, color returning to his face. We didn't talk loudly about the plan, but there was a current of shared understanding. Kai was eating a sandwich and looking at his phone, but I could tell he was thinking. "The morning was good," he said without looking up. "We established the physical toll. The afternoon is for props." He took a bite of his sandwich. "We need to demonstrate that we are actively trying to mitigate the harm this policy is causing us. We are being proactive about our wellness." The beautiful corporate-sounding phrase. It was perfect. We returned to our desks after lunch, ready for Act 2. Kai was the first. He walked in holding a small gray cushion, the kind you might use for lumbar support. He sat down, assumed the position, and then meticulously placed the cushion directly between his knees, squeezing it gently. He let out a soft, contented sigh, as if he'd just discovered the secret to ergonomic nirvana. Serena's head popped up over her office wall, her eyes narrowed as she saw the cushion. She watched him for a solid minute, trying to find a rule he was breaking. But he wasn't. If anything, he was showing a proactive commitment to his physical well-being in the workplace. He was using her own language against her. She couldn't say a thing. She ducked back down behind her wall, defeated. That was the green light. Within half an hour, it was a full-blown cushion revolution. People were creative. One guy rolled up his spare hoodie and wedged it between his legs. Another, in a moment of sheer genius, grabbed an empty cardboard box from the recycling bin and placed it between his knees. I found an old 3-ring binder that was falling apart and used that. It wasn't comfortable, but it made a statement. The office no longer looked like an office. It looked like a physical therapy ward for people with identical, very specific injuries. The absurdity level had been cranked to 11. The constant symphony of groans and stretches continued, now supplemented by the occasional squeak of a cushion or the rustle of a makeshift support device. We had another accident around 2 p.m. Kai needed to go to the printer. He stood up, forgetting about the cushion between his knees. The cushion dropped to the floor. He, in a display of incredible commitment to the role, tried to bend over and pick it up without widening his stance. This involved a very awkward, stiff-legged squat that made him look like a flamingo trying to bow. He lost his balance and had to grab onto a filing cabinet to steady himself, letting out a frustrated sigh. The entire charade took about 30 seconds. A simple trip to the printer was now a complex physical challenge. Serena was just staring at her computer screen, pretending none of this was happening. She was trying to will it away through sheer force of ignoring it, but the soft chaos was undeniable. The climax, the moment that broke the entire policy, came later that afternoon. It was magnificent. An email had gone out earlier in the day about a brief project update meeting. It was with a senior manager from another division, a guy who was several pay grades above Serena. Let's just call him the director. He was an old-school, no-nonsense type. He cared about results, not office politics. The meeting was in the main glass-walled conference room, the fishbowl. The attendees were Serena, the director, and 3 members of our team, including, crucially, Youssef. We could all see them gather around the big conference table. Serena looked nervous. This was her chance to look competent in front of a superior. The director sat down like a normal person. Serena sat down, primly and properly. And then Youssef sat down. He performed his usual pained ritual of folding his large body into the required posture. Even from across the office, we could see the tension in his shoulders. He was squeezed into his chair, knees pressed together, looking like he was about to be launched into space. The meeting started. Serena was talking, pointing at a chart. The director wasn't looking at the chart. He was looking at Youssef. He had a puzzled expression on his face. He watched Youssef for a good minute, who was shifting uncomfortably, his face tight with discomfort. Finally, the director held up a hand, interrupting Serena mid-sentence. We couldn't hear what he said, but we could read the room. He gestured towards Youssef, a clear question on his face. Something like, "Is this guy okay?" Serena's face froze. A deer in the headlights. She stammered something, giving a weak, dismissive wave of her hand, trying to get the meeting back on track. But the director wasn't letting it go. He was still looking at Youssef with genuine concern. And then it happened. Youssef's body betrayed him. A massive, uncontrollable cramp seized his leg. His leg shot out from under the table, kicking with the force of a mule. It slammed into the table leg with a loud thud that we could actually hear from our desks. He let out a pained roar and jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over backwards with a crash. He stood there in the middle of the meeting, clutching his thigh, hopping on one foot. The meeting was completely derailed. The director was on his feet, looking alarmed. Serena's face went from pale to ghostly white. Her grand presentation, her moment to shine, had been destroyed by a man-sized Charlie horse. It was public humiliation of the highest order. Her project to create a safe and considerate environment had physically assaulted its largest employee in front of a company executive. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. The director said something to Yusuf, who was still trying to walk off the cramp, and then said something short and sharp to Serena. He then turned, walked out of the conference room, and went straight back to his own part of the building without a backwards glance. The meeting was over. Serena just stood there for a moment amidst the wreckage, her face a perfect mask of horror. Then she slowly, mechanically, picked up the fallen chair and scurried back to her office, closing the door behind her. A beautiful, reverent silence fell over our department. We had won. The next morning, there were no posters on the walls. They had all been taken down. No one assumed the position. We all sat normally, gloriously, comfortably. We sprawled. It was a beautiful thing. Serena's door remained closed all morning. Just before lunch, an email landed in everyone's inbox. It was from the director's office. The subject line was clarification on workplace ergonomics. The email was short and to the point. It stated that, for the health and safety of all employees, everyone was encouraged to find a comfortable and sustainable sitting posture that worked for them. It mentioned something about listening to your body and taking regular breaks. It never mentioned Project SPACE or the no manspreading rule. It didn't have to. The policy was dead and buried. A quiet collective sigh of relief washed through the office. Kai leaned back in his chair, put his feet up on a filing cabinet, and folded his hands behind his head with a contented smile. The war was over. Serena emerged from her office later that day, but she wasn't the same person. The relentless energy was gone. The fake smile was gone. She avoided eye contact with everyone. She just looked small and defeated. She had lost all her authority. Her crusade had ended in a spectacular, self-inflicted failure. She lasted another 2 weeks. It was an awkward time. She mostly kept to herself. Then, one Friday afternoon, another email. This one was from the head of HR. It announced that Serena had decided to pursue a new and exciting opportunity elsewhere. We all knew what that meant. And just like that, she was gone. Life in the office went back to normal. The beige walls seemed a little less oppressive, the hum of the lights a little less monotonous. We had faced down the absurdity of corporate activism, not with anger or protest, but with perfect absolute compliance. We showed them that the cure was infinitely worse than the non-existent disease. And I have never ever sat more comfortably at my desk.